So the first major mass movement of Indians against the British rule was known as the Swadeshi movement. The partition of Bengal by Lord Curzon resulted in the most spectacular manifestation of the militant spirit. It sparked of an anti-partition movement, which is otherwise known as the Swadeshi movement. So different uh, phases were going on in this anti-partition agitation, and the leadership which was provided by the moderate leaders, particularly your Surendranath Banerjee and Krishna Kumar Mitra. It was Krishna Kumar Mitra who first suggested in his paper Sanjeevani that people should boycott all British goods. So the the Swadeshi movement was regarded as the first major mass movement of Indian against British colonial policy. And the word Swadeshi was first used by Swami Dayananda Saraswati. Different meetings were held in different cities against the Britishers, against the British colonial policy, and the people, different parts of Bengal, particularly in Bengal, different meetings were held, and their main motto was to boycott of British goods. And apart from this, the many festivals also marked the beginning of this Swadeshi movement by um, by different national leaders. Apart from this, the Swadeshi movement drew a large section of the society into active participation, particularly from top to bottom, leaders were came forward and they participated in this Swadeshi movement, and particularly to make national feelings among the Indians. In that respect, Bal Gangadhar Tilak started the Shivaji festival in Maharashtra, and this became popular in Bengal during this Swadeshi period. And also, the Swadeshi movement began an agitation against the decision of Lord Curzon to partition of Bengal, which was occurred in the year 1905. So, different issues and different uh, different decision were taken by the nationalist leaders, and they come forward and they try to agitate against the British colonial policies. After that, in respect of that, during this period, after the partition of Bengal, 1905 to up to 1914, the movement began to spread, and after the First World War, many nationalist movements in India faced major challenges with the split of the Indian National Congress, जोटा कि आम माने कहिचे इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस भारतीय जातीय कांग्रेस जेतेबेले आरंभ हैला 1885 ख्रीष्टाब्द रे परवर्ती समय रे एई भारतीय जातीय कांग्रेस दी भागरे विभक्त होइतिला चरमपंथी एंड नरमपंथी and this nationalist movement in India faced a major challenge with the split of the Indian National Congress into two distinct groups, divided into two groups, and that groups, one was known as extremist group, one was moderate group, and different leaders like Aurobindo Ghosh, Bipin Chandra Bal, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Annie Besant, and other played an important role during that period. And before the emergence of Mahatma Gandhi, India demands home rule, and that known as home rule movement. And why India demands home rule? India demands home rule for two reasons. Firstly, freedom is the right of every nation, as we all know. Number two, because her most important interests are now made subservient to the interest of British Empire without her consent, and her resources are not utilized for her greatest needs. So, the the aspects of home rule movement it was a product. This home rule movement was the product of the First World War. ପ୍ରଥମ ବିଶ୍ୱଯୁଦ୍ଧ ପରେ ଏହି ହୋମ ରୁଲ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟର ଆରମ୍ଭ ହେଇଥିଲା and it was launched by Mrs. Annie Besant. She declared India does not suffer with the blood of her sons and proud tears of her daughters in exchange for so much liberty, so much right. India claims the right as a nation to justice among the peoples of the empire. India asked for this before the war. India asks for during the war. India will ask for it after the war, but not a reward, but as a right, thus she asks for it. It was declared by Mrs. Annie Besant, who founded Theosophical Society. And after the foundation of this movement, again Bal Gangadhar Tilak started the Home Rule movement at Pune in April 1916. 1916 ଖ୍ରୀଷ୍ଟାବ୍ଦରେ ପ୍ରଥମେ 1916 ତୁମେ ମାନେ ଜାଣିଛ ପ୍ରଥମ ବିଶ୍ୱଯୁଦ୍ଧ କେବେରୁ କେବେ ହେଇଥିଲା?
1914 to 1918.
After the First World War, which peace conference was held in Paris?
League of Nations.
After the First World War.
League of Nations was formed.
First of all, Paris Peace Conference, then League of Nations. Okay? ପ୍ୟାରିସ ଶାନ୍ତି ସମ୍ମିଳନୀ ଗଠନ ହେଇଥିଲା 1919 ରେ। ତାପରେ ଲିଗ୍ ଅଫ୍ ନେସନ୍, ପ୍ୟାରିସ ଶାନ୍ତି ସମ୍ମିଳନୀ ଯୋଉ ଟ୍ରିଟି ଗୁଡିକ 5ଟି ଟ୍ରିଟି ହେଇଥିଲା, ସେ ଟ୍ରିଟି ଗୁଡିକ ଫୁଲଫିଲ୍ କରିନଥିଲା ବୋଲି ଲିଗ୍ ଅଫ୍ ନେସନ୍ ର ଷ୍ଟାର୍ଟିଂ ହେଇଥିଲା। So whatever it may be, in 19 I mean for the sake of Indian national movement, we have to know about different movements before the advent of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. And first movement was known as Home Rule movement, which was the product of the First World War. It was launched by Mrs. Annie Besant, who was the founder of Theosophical Society. Then Bal Gangadhar Tilak started the Home Rule movement at Pune in April 1916. But Mrs. Annie Besant who launched this movement in Madras. जोटा प्रथमे मिसेस आनी बेसांत को द्वारा हेतला, से प्रथमे माद्रास रे आरंभ करथिले। परवर्ती समय रे बाल गंगाधर तिलक एई होम रूल मूवमेंट टी कोठी पुना रे स्टार्ट करले एप्रिल 1916 रे। And but this movement could not last long. In August 1917, Mr. Montagu, the Secretary of State for India, made his historic declaration promising self-government by stages. Much of the purpose of the movement thus seemed to be short, and it began to decline fast. Which movement started by Annie Besant and Bal Gangadhar Tilak, that movement was known as Home Rule movement. But it was not spread too far, but later on it could not last long. It was crippled by the Britishers, and in that time it was started in 1916, but it was it did not survive for a long time, for which in August 1917 the British Secretary State for India, whose name was Mr. Montagu, who came to India and he's made a historic declaration to to develop self-government by different stages, and much of the purpose of the movement thus seemed to be served. ସେଥିପାଇଁ ଯୋଉ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟଟି ଆରମ୍ଭ ହେଇଥିଲା ସେ ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଡାଉନ ହେଇଗଲା ଏବଂ ଯାହା ପାଇଁ ବ୍ରିଟିଶର୍ସ ମାନେ ବହୁତ ଉଚ୍ଚ ପଦକ୍ଷେପ ନେଇକି ଏଇ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟକୁ ଡାଉନ କରିଲେ। ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଲକ୍ଷ୍ନୌ ପାକ୍ଟ ମଧ୍ୟ ହେଇଥିଲା ଏଇ ହୋମ ରୁଲ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ ପରେ। ଲକ୍ଷ୍ନୌ ପାକ୍ଟ 1916, because as we all know, Hindu and Muslims before partition were came together and fought against the British colonial policy. And during this Lucknow Pact, which was mm, developed in 1916, the Muslims had secured the best consideration in the Act of 1909. But in due course of time, certain differences arose between the Britishers and the Muslims, because after the partition of Bengal, the Muslim differences with the government started rigorously, and this created when the Muslim university created at Aligarh, and at that time the attitude between attitude towards the Turkey, a Muslim country, and the English attitude towards Turkey and involvement of Turkey in the First World War against Great Britain and her allies, it created a freeze between Anglo-Muslim relationship. এই ଯୋଉ ଲକ୍ଷ୍ନୌ ପ୍ୟାକ୍ଟଟା ହେଇଥିଲା କାରଣ ଏଇଥିପାଇଁ ପିଲାମାନେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ପ୍ରଥମ ବିଶ୍ୱଯୁଦ୍ଧରେ ମୁସଲିମ ମାନେ ପର୍ଟିକୁଲାରଲି ତୁର୍କୀ ଇନଭଲ୍ଭ ହେଇଥିଲା ଡିଫରେଣ୍ଟ ଯୁଦ୍ଧ ମାନଙ୍କରେ, ଯଥା ବଲକାନ ଯୁଦ୍ଧ, ତୁର୍କ ଇଟାଲିଆନ ଯୁଦ୍ଧ, ଏଇ ସବୁ ଯୁଦ୍ଧରେ ଇଂଲିଶ ମାନଙ୍କ ବିପକ୍ଷରେ ଥିଲା ବୋଲି ସେଥିପାଇଁ ଇଂଲିଶ ମାନେ ବିଭିନ୍ନ ପ୍ରକାର ଆଡମ୍ବର ଦେଖେଇ ମୁସଲିମ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ନିଚ ଦୃଷ୍ଟିରେ ଦେଖୁଥିଲେ। ସେଥିପାଇଁ ସେମାନେ ଗୋଟେ ପ୍ୟାକ୍ଟ, ଗୋଟେ ସାଧାରଣ ସନ୍ଧି ତାଙ୍କ ଭିତରେ ହେଇଥିଲା। କିନ୍ତୁ ଏଇଠି some nationalist Muslim leader like Maulana Abul Kalam Azad came forward and started a movement against the Britishers. But later on, this movement, this pact also adopted with the policies of Home Rule movement. Like Congress, the Muslim League placed its goal at the attainment of self-government under the British Crown by constitutional means. In 1916, both the Congress and the Muslims reached an agreement known as the Lucknow Pact. ये जो लखनऊ पैक्ट ହେଇଥିଲା ଏଥିରେ କଣ ହେଇଥିଲା ପିଲାମାନେ? In this pact the Congress accepted, the Congress, which Congress? The Indian National Congress accepted the principles of separate electorate for the Muslim and weightage to Muslim in minority provinces. ଯେତେବେଳେ ଇଲେକ୍ସନ ଗୁଡିକ ଡିକ୍ଲାର ହେଲା, ମଣ୍ଟେଙ୍କୋ ଚେଲଫର୍ମଡ ରିଫର୍ମସ ଗଭର୍ଣ୍ଣମେଣ୍ଟ ଅଫ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ ଆକ୍ଟ 1909 ଯେତେବେଳେ ହେଇଗଲା, ସେତେବେଳେ ଏମାନେ ମୁସଲିମ ମାନେ they created differences. They knew the differences between the British and the Muslim, for which a pact was an agreement or pact was going on between the Congress and the Muslims, and that pact was known as in the history as Lucknow Pact. And in this pact, the Congress accepted the principle of separate electorate for the Muslims, and weightage to Muslim in the minority provinces. Several other concessions were given to the Muslim League, and the latter agreed with the Congress on the joint scheme, which implied that India should be lifted from the position of dependency. So, unity was forged between two parties, and that party is known as Congress Party and Muslim League. After that, there came Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi in um the political in the national movement, and he played an important role. Um, before that, we are going to discuss about Mahatma Gandhi. Who was Mahatma Gandhi? ପିଲାମାନେ ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀ କିଏ?
Father of nation.
Nation.
Father of nation. So the full name of Mahatma
Mohandas
Gandhi was
Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.
Mohandas
Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.
Karamchand Gandhi. Thank you. More than 60 years after his death, more than 60 years, 1948, more than 60 years. କେବେ ମୃତ୍ୟୁବରଣ କଲେ?
1948 January 30.
ହଁ. So, more than 60 years after his death, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, popularly known as Mahatma Gandhi, is still remembered for his legendary Satyagraha campaigns and his philosophy non-violent resistance. Gandhiji's philosophy has inspired many of the most famous resistance movements of the 20th century. And his philosophy based on non-violence, truth and honesty, satyagraha, cooperation and love. ତେଣୁ ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀ popularly known as ମୋହନଦାସ କରମଚନ୍ଦ ଗାନ୍ଧୀ ତାଙ୍କର ସତ୍ୟାଗ୍ରହ ମେଥଡ ସତ୍ୟ ଅହିଂସା ବଳରେ ଏବଂ ପ୍ରେମ ଆଉ ସଦ୍ଭାବ ବଳରେ ସେ ଯୋଉ ତାଙ୍କର ଯୋଉ ପଲିସି ଗୁଡିକ ଆଡପ୍ଟ କରିଛନ୍ତି ସେ ପଲିସି ଗୁଡିକରେ ମଧ୍ୟ ସାହସିକତାର ଦେଖେଇକି ସେ ଭାରତୀୟ ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ସଂଗ୍ରାମରେ ଏକ ଭୂମିକା ଗ୍ରହଣ କରିଅଛନ୍ତି ଏବଂ ସେଇ ତାଙ୍କରି ଭୂମିକାରେ ତିନୋଟି ମହାନ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ ସବୁ ଆରମ୍ଭ ହୋଇଥିଲା ସେ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ ଗୁଡିକ ହଉଛି ନନ୍ କୋଅପରେସନ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ ସିଭିଲ ଡିସୋବିଡିଏନ୍ସ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ and quit India movement. Phase by phase, we'll discuss these movements. But before that, we have to know the early life of Mahatma Gandhi. As you know, he was born on 2nd October 1869 AD in Porbandar, a coastal town in present-day Gujarat, India. So, he was born on 2nd October 1869. His father name was Karamchand Gandhi, who belonged to Hindu Moth community, who was the Divan of Porbandar state, a small princely state in the Kathiawar agency of British India. After he completed his formal education, he went to England in the year 1888 and studied there law and completing his education, and later on he came back to India in 1891. ମୋହନଦାସ କରମଚନ୍ଦ ଗାନ୍ଧୀ ଅକ୍ଟୋବର 2 1869 ଖ୍ରୀଷ୍ଟାବ୍ଦରେ ଜନ୍ମଗ୍ରହଣ କରିଥିଲେ କୋଉଠି ପୋରବନ୍ଦର ଗୁଜୁରାଟ ଠାରେ ତାଙ୍କ ଫାଦରଙ୍କ ନାଁ ହଉଛି କରମଚନ୍ଦ ଗାନ୍ଧୀ ତା ମାତା ନାଁ କଣ
Putuli Bai.
ଭେରି ଗୁଡ ଭେରି ଗୁଡ ତେଣୁ ସେ ପ୍ରଥମେ ତାଙ୍କର ଫର୍ମାଲ ଏଜୁକେସନ ଛାଡିକି ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଆଇନ ପଢିବା ପାଇଁ ସେ କୋଉଠିକି ଗଲେ ଇଂଲଣ୍ଡକୁ ଗଲେ କେବେ ଗଲେ 1888 ଖ୍ରୀଷ୍ଟାବ୍ଦରେ ଏବଂ ସେ ଇଂଲଣ୍ଡରୁ ସେ ପାଠ ପଢିକି କମବ୍ୟାକ୍ କଲେ ଭାରତକୁ 1891 ଖ୍ରୀଷ୍ଟାବ୍ଦରେ and he started his practice first at Rajkot then at Bombay. ପ୍ରଥମେ ସେ ରାଜକୋଟ ଠାରେ ତାଙ୍କର law practice କଲେ, ତାପରେ ବମ୍ବେ ଠାରେ. And after some time he had assigned from a farm Abdullah and Co to go to South Africa. ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକା ଯିବା ପାଇଁ ତାଙ୍କୁ ଗୋଟେ କମ୍ପାନୀ ବା ଫାର୍ମ, ସେ ଫାର୍ମ ନାଁ ହଉଛି ଅବଦୁଲ୍ଲା ଆଣ୍ଡ କୋ, ସେ କମ୍ପାନୀ ତାଙ୍କୁ ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକାକୁ ପଠେଇଲା କିଛି ପ୍ରପର୍ଟି ଡିସ୍ପ୍ୟୁଟ ହେଇଛି ତାକୁ କ୍ଲିୟର କରିବା ପାଇଁ, ଏବଂ he went to South Africa and started participating there. It was in South Africa. It was in South Africa that Gandhiji was attracted to politics. He was shocked to see the degrading condition of the Indians settled there. Indians were called coolies, coolie merchant, coolie teachers, coolie lawyers, coolie doctors, and so on. ତେଣୁ ସେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକା ଗଲେ ସେତେବେଳେ ସିଏ ସକ୍ଡ ହେଇଗଲେ, ଭାରତୀୟ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ବିଭିନ୍ନ ପ୍ରକାର କୁଲି ଆଖ୍ୟା ଦିଆ ହଉଛି, ତେଣୁ ତାଙ୍କୁ ବହୁତ ନିମ୍ନ ରୂପେ ଦେଖା ଯାଉଛନ୍ତି। ଆଣ୍ଡ ବ୍ଲାକ୍ ଆଣ୍ଡ ହ୍ୱାଇଟ୍ ଯୋଉ କମ୍ପ୍ଲେକ୍ସ ସେଠି ଡିସ୍କସନ ହଉଛି, ସେଇଥିପାଇଁ ସେ ସାଙ୍ଗେ ସାଙ୍ଗେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଗଲେ, ଦ ଇନସିଡେଣ୍ଟ was very much shocked to Gandhiji. And um, once while traveling by train, ଯେତେବେଳେ ସେ travel କରୁଥିଲେ, he was asked by a white passenger to leave the first class compartment because he did not want to share with a black person. ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀ ସେମିତି ହ୍ୱାଇଟ୍ ଦେଖାଯାଉନଥିବା ତ ବ୍ଲାକ୍ ପର୍ସନ ହେଇଥିବାରୁ ତାଙ୍କୁ ଫାର୍ଷ୍ଟ କ୍ଲାସ କମ୍ପାର୍ଟମେଣ୍ଟରେ ମଧ୍ୟ ବସାଗଲା ନାହିଁ। And when Gandhiji refused to do so, he was pushed forcibly out of the compartment and his luggage was thrown on the platform. ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀଙ୍କର ଯେତେବେଳେ ସେ ଯାଉଥିଲେ, ଫେରୁଥିଲେ ଟ୍ରେନରେ, ସେଇ ସମୟରେ ତାଙ୍କର ଗୋଟେ ଡିସ୍କସନ ଭିତରେ ଗୋଟେ ହ୍ୱାଇଟ୍ ପାସେଞ୍ଜର, ମାନେ ଗୋଟେ ଫରେନର ସହିତ ଗୋଟେ ଯୁକ୍ତି, ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକା ଲୋକମାନେ ତାଙ୍କ ସହିତ ଗୋଟେ ଯୁକ୍ତି ତର୍କ ହେଲା। ତେଣୁ ସେ ଫାର୍ଷ୍ଟ କମ୍ପାର୍ଟମେଣ୍ଟରେ ଆସିଥିଲେ, ତାଙ୍କୁ ସେ କହିଲେ ତୁମେ ପଳାଅ ଥାର୍ଡ କମ୍ପାର୍ଟମେଣ୍ଟକୁ। ସିଏ ଯେମିତି ଗଲେନି, ତାଙ୍କୁ ସେ ଫୋର୍ସଫୁଲି ତାଙ୍କୁ ବାହାର କରିଦେଲେ ଟ୍ରେନରୁ, ଆଉ ତାଙ୍କ ଲଗେଜ ଗୁଡାକୁ ମଧ୍ୟ ଫୋପାଡ଼ି ଦେଇଥିଲେ। ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଦିସ୍ ଇଭେଣ୍ଟ ଯୋଉ ପଠେଇଥିଲେ, ଇଟ୍ ୱାଜ very much shocked to the mind of Mahatma Gandhi, and it became a turning point in the life of Gandhiji. And he decided to stay in South Africa and fight against this injustice. And Gandhiji called a meeting of the Indian settlers at Pretoria. ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକା ଗୋଟେ ଜାଗା ଅଛି, ସେ ପ୍ରେଟୋରିଆ ଜାଗା ଠାରେ, ସେଠି ସେ ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକା ଅବସ୍ଥିତ ଥିବା ଭାରତୀୟ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ଡାକିଲେ ଏବଂ ସେଠି ଗୋଟେ ମିଟିଂ କଲେ। And he advised them to conduct themselves honestly and fight against discrimination, the black and white. He sent memoranda to the railway authorities and coach company about the racial discrimination. And the authorities yielded to his request and properly dressed Indians were allowed to travel in first class. ତେଣୁ ଏଠି ଗାନ୍ଧୀଜୀଙ୍କର ପ୍ରଥମ ଯୋଉ ଆନ୍ଦୋଳନଟି କୋଉଠି ସେ କରିଥିଲେ ପିଲାମାନେ? କୋଉଠି କରିଥିଲେ ଆନ୍ଦୋଳନ ପ୍ରଥମେ? ଫାଷ୍ଟ ପେଜ ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକାରେ, ପ୍ରିଟୋରିଆ ଯୋଉଠି ଥିଲେ, ସେଇଠି ତାଙ୍କର ପ୍ରିଟୋରିଆ ଠାରେ, ସେଇ ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକା ଗୋଟେ ଜାଗାରେ, ସେଠି ସେ ଲୋକମାନଙ୍କୁ ଏକତ୍ରିତ କଲେ, ଭାରତୀୟ ମାନଙ୍କୁ, ଆଉ ଭାରତୀୟ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ଏକତ୍ରିତ କରି ତାଙ୍କୁ କହିଲେ ଏଇ ଯୋଉ ରାସିଆଲ ଡିସ୍କ୍ରିମିନେସନ ହଉଛି, ତେଣୁ ଆମେ ଫାଇଟ କରିବା। ତେଣୁ ସେଇଠି ସେ ଏକତ୍ରିତ ହୋଇ ସେ ମେମୋରାଣ୍ଡମ ଲେଖିଥିଲେ, ରିପୋର୍ଟ ଲେଖିଥିଲେ, କାହାକୁ? ରେଲୱେ ଅଥରିଟିଜ କୁ ଆଣ୍ଡ କୋଚ୍ କମ୍ପାନୀ କି। ଏବଂ ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ସେ ରେଲୱେ ଅଥରିଟିଜ ସେମାନେ ଆସିକି ଭୁଲ ମାଗିଲେ ଏବଂ ଯେ କହିଲେ ଭାରତୀୟ ମାନେ ମଧ୍ୟ ଫାର୍ଷ୍ଟ କ୍ଲାସ ରେ ଯାଇପାରିବେ। ଦିସ୍ ୱାଜ ଦ ଫାଷ୍ଟ ଭିକ୍ଟୋରୀ ଅଫ ହିଜ ପଲିଟିକାଲ କ୍ୟାରିୟର। କାହା ପଲିଟିକାଲ କ୍ୟାରିୟର? ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀଙ୍କର। And the next step that Gandhiji took was to organize Natal Indian Congress. So after eventful career in South Africa, Gandhiji came back to India in 1915 AD, and he was given a hero's welcome when he landed at Bombay. ସେ ବମ୍ବେରେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଲ୍ୟାଣ୍ଡ କଲେ ସେତେବେଳେ ତାଙ୍କୁ ଗୋଟେ ହିରୋ ବୋଲି ଆଖ୍ୟା ଦେଇଥିଲେ ଭାରତୀୟ ମାନେ। ସେ କୋଉଠୁ ଫେରିକି ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକାକୁ ଫେରି ଆସିଲା ପରେ stayed at Pune at the headquarters of the servants of the People's Society and had a discussion with Gopal Krishna Gokhale on the political problems of the country. ଏଠି ଆମେ ଯଦି ପଚାରିବା ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀଙ୍କ ଗୁରୁ କିଏ?
गोपाल कृष्ण गोखले.
Gopal Krishna Gokhale. He was the guru. He was the teacher of Mahatma Gandhi. And at that time, the First World War was going on, and he had firm conviction that India could be freed only by offering full cooperation to the British ruler. ତେଣୁ ଏଇଠି ଗାନ୍ଧୀଙ୍କର ଗୋଟେ ରହିଲା ଯେ ମତ ଆମେ ପ୍ରଥମେ ବ୍ରିଟିଶର୍ସ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ଫୁଲ କୋଅପରେସନ ଦବା, କିନ୍ତୁ ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଗାନ୍ଧୀଜୀ ସେଟାକୁ ଜାଣି ପାରିନଥିଲେ ଏବଂ ବ୍ରିଟିଶର୍ସ ମାନଙ୍କ ସହିତ ସେ ପୁରା ଫ୍ରିଡମ ଦେଇଥିଲେ ସବୁ କାମରେ ଇଏ କରିବା ପାଇଁ। କିନ୍ତୁ ଯେତେବେଳେ ସେ ଜାଣିପାରିଲେ ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ, but before that he was awarded the Kesar Hind gold medal for his service to the British Empire in the First World War. ପ୍ରଥମ ବିଶ୍ୱଯୁଦ୍ଧରେ ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀ ବହୁତ ପ୍ରକାର ସାହାଯ୍ୟ କରିଥିଲେ, କିନ୍ତୁ ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଜାଣିଲେ ବ୍ରିଟିଶର୍ସ ମାନଙ୍କର ହୀନ ପଲିସିସ୍ ଗୁଡା in 1920 AD Gandhiji returned the medal to express his dissatisfaction with the policies of British government. ତେଣୁ ଯୋଉ ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ଗଭର୍ଣ୍ଣମେଣ୍ଟର ପଲିସିସ୍ ଗୁଡାକୁ ସେ ଜମା ପସନ୍ଦ କରେଇଲେନି, କିନ୍ତୁ ପ୍ରଥମେ ସେ ବ୍ରିଟିଶର୍ସ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ବହୁତ ପ୍ରକାର ହେଲ୍ପ କରିଥିଲେ, କିନ୍ତୁ ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ସେ ବହୁତ dissatisfied ହେଇଥିଲେ। And the year 1919 AD was an important landmark in the history of India's struggle for freedom, because in that year the entry of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi into the arena of Indian politics. Indian politics रे मोहनदास करमचंद को एंट्री को केते ख्रीष्टाब्द रे 1919 and he becomes the principal director in the drama of India's freedom struggle. The history of India after 1919 became the history of his life. As long as 28 years, from 1920 to 1948, he directed the movement in such a way that he ultimately brought about independence for the Indians. So after he came to India, he took the reins of the Indian National Congress in his hand. With him, a new technique, a new orientation in spirit came, and Gandhiji realized that Indians were no match for the British in physical force. And he adopted the doctrine of Satyagraha. And the word Satyagraha consists of two Sanskrit words. Satya means truth, Agraha means insistence. So the term means firm insistence on truth. It was a new technique which, though perfectly peaceful, implied non-submission to what was considered wrong and willing acceptance of pain and suffering involved in opposing it. So different methods were adopted by Mahatma Gandhi in the freedom struggle. According to Mahatma Gandhi, ପିଲାମାନେ ବୁଝିପାରୁଛ ତ?
Yes, sir.
So according to Mahatma Gandhi, one should be brave and not a coward. He should present his views, suggestions, and thoughts without being violent. But one should fight a war with the weapons of truth and non-violence. ଗାନ୍ଧୀ କହୁଛନ୍ତି one should brave and not a coward. ତମେ ବୀର ହୁଅ, କାର୍ଡ ହୁଅନି, ଭୀରୁ ହୁଅନି, କିନ୍ତୁ ତମେ ମାନେ ବୀରତ୍ୱର ସହ ନିଜ ଭ୍ୟୁଜ, ନିଜ ସଜେସନ, ନିଜ ଥଟ୍ସ ଗୁଡିକ ମାନେ ସେୟାର କର ୱିଦାଉଟ୍ ଭାଓଲେଣ୍ଟ, ରାଗିକି ନୁହେଁ, ଏବଂ ଫାଇଟ୍ ଏ ୱାର, ଯୁଦ୍ଧ କର, କିନ୍ତୁ ୱିପନ କଣ ହବ? ସତ୍ୟ ଓ ଅହିଂସା। এই দুইটি ୱିପନ, truth and non-violence, and the Gandhian methods are the combination of truth, sacrifice, non-violence, selfless service, and cooperation. And Gandhi always said that there is no God higher than truth. According to Gandhi's thoughts, non-violence is ultimate solution of every kind of problem in the world. So Gandhiji's methods in the freedom struggle consist of satyagraha, truth and honesty, non-violence, cooperation and love. Then Gandhiji's concept of satyagraha. What is the Gandhiji's concept of satyagraha? Satyagraha is a dynamic weapon of winning violence. He trusted that Satyagraha is a specific type of battle where there is no doubt of defeat. It is certain that his investigation of the Hindu tradition and his experience of passive resistance against racial separation in South. So, the idea of non-cooperation, the idea of civil disobedience, the idea of fasting, these techniques which was adopted by Mahatma Gandhi against the Britishers marked a new concept to the Indian people. And the most powerful weapon of Gandhi, which we know, that powerful weapon was truth. The philosophy of non-violence and the concept of cooperation and love. And this philosophy of non-violence, method of satyagraha, truth, love, and cooperation managed the urge for freedom and empowered India to gain freedom in the year 1947 AD. ତେଣୁ ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀଙ୍କର ଯୋଉ ମେଥଡ ଗୁଡିକ ସେ ଆଡପ୍ଟ କରିଥିଲେ, ସତ୍ୟ, ଅହିଂସା, ପ୍ରେମ, ସଦ୍ଭାବ, ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କ ଭିତରେ ଏକତା ରକ୍ଷା କରିବା, ଏଇଗୁଡିକ ଯୋଉ ଥିଲା, ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଭାରତ ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ଲାଭ ଯେବେ କରିଥିଲା 1947 ଖ୍ରୀଷ୍ଟାବ୍ଦରେ, ଏଇଠି ଏଇ ତାଙ୍କ ମେଥଡ ଦ୍ୱାରା ହେଇପାରିଥିଲା। And Gandhiji played a dominant role in the freedom struggle of India and launched three powerful movements which paved the path for Indian independence. His satyagraha had two branches, as I have discussed, the truth and non-violence. So after that, three important movements was launched by Mahatma Gandhi. First movement was non-cooperation movement, and which was launched in the year 1920. Many factors were responsible for the starting of this movement. First, the passing of the Rowlatt Act. Second, the Treaty of Sharp. These two important facts very much disturbed Mahatma Gandhi, which later on he started the non-cooperation movement. But before that, different satyagraha movements were undertaken by Mahatma Gandhi, First one was Champaran Satyagraha in South Africa, जोटा racial discrimination आमे पढ़िले. Next was Kheda Satyagraha, Kheda Satyagraha, which was known as the Pigeons movement. These Pigeon movements also started in different parts, particularly Gujarat. In Gujarat, this movement created a um, very disturbances in Gujarat due to severe plague. Then Ahmedabad, जो मिल स्ट्राइक सत्याग्रह मिल वर्कर्स माने आंदोलन करथिले. एई तीनिटा सत्याग्रह परे आम नॉन कोऑपरेशन मूवमेंट हला. एवं एई जो नॉन कोऑपरेशन मूवमेंट हला सेथि पे विभिन्न प्रकार कारण मान अछि. एवं से कारण मानकरू प्रथम कारण होची रावलट एक्ट. What do you mean by Rowlatt Act? ପିଲାମାନେ ଜାଣିଛ କିଛି Rowlatt Act ର ଅର୍ଥ? ପିଲାମାନେ କିଛି ଜାଣିଛ କି ଏଇ ଯୋଉ Rowlatt Act ର ଅର୍ଥ କିଛି?
नहीं सर।
ଏଇ ଯୋଉ ଆକ୍ଟ ଟି ପାସ୍ କଲା ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ଗଭର୍ଣ୍ଣମେଣ୍ଟ, यार अर्थ होची arrest of a person without warrant, no provision of appeal. माने ये जो रावलट एक्ट टी हैला, तमे जो समय रे गोटे पर्सन को तमे अरेस्ट करि परिबो without any appeal or without any warrant. So this act raised a storm of opposition unknown before in India. Gandhiji decided to oppose with satyagraha. A general hartal for all over the country was called on 6th April 1919. Gandhiji's satyagraha provided a rallying point to the people belonging to different sections. In that meantime, the anti-Rowlatt agitations were accompanied by violence and it gained momentum in several towns of Punjab. ये जो एजिटेशन टी हेइतला पंजाब रे बेसी देखैतला एवं जो चौरी चौरा सॉरी ए जो जालियाना वाला बाग इंसिडेंट हेइतला सेही समय रे गवर्नर थिले पंजाब रो माइकल ओडिया had already become infamous for his oppressive measures in history. At that time, two popular leaders of Punjab, who were they? Name the two popular leaders of Punjab from Amritsar. Amritsar ଦୁଇ popular movement during the time of non-cooperation movement. किए थिले पिलामाने? Hello? Am I audible to you?
ଲାଲ ଲାଜପତ ରାୟ ଥିଲେ ବୋଧେ?
ନାଇଁ ନାଇଁ, ସେଠି ଦୁଇ ଜଣ ଥିଲେ, ଡକ୍ଟର ସତ୍ୟପାଲ ଆଣ୍ଡ ଡକ୍ଟର କିଚଲୁ. ଯେତେବେଳେ ଏ ଯୋଉ ଜାଲିଆନାବାଗ ମସାକାର ହେଲା କୋଉଠି? ପଞ୍ଜାବ ଅମୃତସରରେ. ସେଇ ସମୟରେ ଟୁ ପପୁଲାର ଲିଡର୍ସ ଅଫ ପଞ୍ଜାବ were deported from Amritsar. They were Dr. Satyapal and Dr. Kichlu. A large crowd gathered at the Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar on April 13, 1919 to protest against the arrest of Dr. Satyapal and Dr. Kichlu. कौन है कही दउची जेतेबेले रावलट एक्ट आरंभ इंट्रोड्यूस है सेतेबेले यार अर्थ होची अरेस्ट ए पर्सन विदाउट वारेंट. माने तमे बिना वारेंट रे हमर जहा लॉ अछि बिना वारेंट रे तमे काहाकू अरेस्ट करि परिबो नाही. किंतु ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट कहला आमे आने बिना वारेंट रे मध्य अरेस्ट करि परिबो. सेथि पई एठी प्रोटेस्ट आरंभ हैला एवं प्रोटेस्ट विभिन्न जगह आरंभ हैला एवं several town, particularly Punjab ର several towns ରେ ମଧ୍ୟ ଏ protest ହେଇଥିଲା ଏବଂ ଏଇ protest ରେ ଦୁଇ ଜଣ ଫେମସ୍ ଲିଡର ଅଫ ପଞ୍ଜାବ ଆରେଷ୍ଟ ହେଲେ, ତାକୁ ଅମୃତସର ନେଇଗଲେ, ବୁଝିପାରିଲ। ଏବଂ ସେଇଠି ସେ ତାଙ୍କ ଆରେଷ୍ଟକୁ ପ୍ରୋଟେଷ୍ଟ କଲେ। କେବେ? ଏପ୍ରିଲ 13, 1919 ରେ ତାଙ୍କ ଆରେଷ୍ଟ ଯୋଉ ଇଂଲିଶ ମାନେ ବ୍ରିଟିଶର୍ସ ମାନେ କରିଥିଲେ, ସେଥିପାଇଁ ତାଙ୍କୁ ଆରେଷ୍ଟ ଯୋଉ ହେଇଥିଲା, ତାଙ୍କୁ ପ୍ରୋଟେଷ୍ଟ କଲେ। ଏବଂ ସେତେବେଳେ ଗଭର୍ଣ୍ଣର ଅଫ ପଞ୍ଜାବ ଥିଲେ ଜେନେରାଲ ଡାୟାର। ସେଇ ସମୟରେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ପ୍ରୋଟେଷ୍ଟ ହେଇଥିଲା, ସେ କୋଉଠି କରିଥିଲେ ପ୍ରୋଟେଷ୍ଟ? ନା ଜାଲିଆନା ବାଗା ଠାରେ ସେମାନେ ପ୍ରୋଟେଷ୍ଟ କରିଥିଲେ। ବଟ୍ ଜେନେରାଲ ଡାୟାର ସରାଉଣ୍ଡେଡ ଦ ବ୍ୟାଗ ୱିଥ ହିଜ ସୋଲଜର୍ସ। ସେ ସେ ଯୋଉ ପ୍ରୋଟେଷ୍ଟ ଯୋଉ ହଉଥିଲା, ଆନ୍ଦୋଳନ ଯୋଉଠି ହଉଥିଲା, ତା ଚାରିପଟେ ଜେନେରାଲ ଡାୟାର ତା ସୋଲଜର୍ସ ମାନେ ଘେରି ରହିଥିଲେ। ଏବଂ ସେଠି ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଜେନେରାଲ ଡାୟାର ତାଙ୍କୁ ଫାୟାର କରିବା, ଲୋକମାନଙ୍କୁ ଫାୟାର କରିବା ପାଇଁ ଅର୍ଡର ଦେଇଥିଲେ। ଏବଂ ସେମାନେ ମଧ୍ୟ ଅର୍ଡରକୁ ମାନିକି ସେଠି ତାଙ୍କୁ ସୁଟ ମାନେ ଗୁଳି ଫୁଟେଇଥିଲେ, ଯାହା ଦ୍ୱାରା 1000 innocent people were killed and many more wounded. The conscience of the nation was shaken at the massacre of innocent people. ବହୁ innocent people ମାନଙ୍କର ମୃତ୍ୟୁବରଣ ଘଟିଥିଲା। And the Punjab tragedy, this Jallianwala tragedy had a lasting impact on succeeding generation. It gave a new turn to the national movement, and it becomes a mass movement. The Punjab tragedy brought Gandhi into the forefront of Indian politics. So this was the first cause. The next was Treaty of Sorves, which was made between Turkey and the allies, were very severe, were resented by the Muslims of India. Turkey was given a humiliating treatment after the First World War. ପ୍ରଥମ ବିଶ୍ୱଯୁଦ୍ଧ ପରେ ତୁର୍କୀକୁ humiliating ରେ ଟ୍ରିଟି ଦ୍ୱାରା ତାକୁ କ୍ରିପଲ୍ଡ କରାଯାଇଥିଲା। ଏବଂ ତୁର୍କୀ ସୁଲତାନ ଲଷ୍ଟ ହିଜ ଖିଲାଫତ, ଯୋଉଟା କି ଆମେ ଖିଲାଫତ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ କହୁଛେ, ଖିଲାଫତ ଖଲିଫା କହୁଛେ, ଆମେ ମୁସଲିମ ସୁଲତାନ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ଖଲିଫା କହୁଛେ। ତେଣୁ ଖଲିଫା ତେଣୁ ଲଷ୍ଟ କଲେ ଆଫ୍ଟର ଦ ଫାର୍ଷ୍ଟ ୱାର୍ଲଡ ୱାର। The Muslims as well as Gandhi and other Congress leaders condemned this action of the British as one of the unparalleled treachery and hypocrisy. ଯେତେବେଳେ ପ୍ରଥମ ବିଶ୍ୱଯୁଦ୍ଧ ସରିଲା, ପରିସମାପ୍ତି ହେଲା, ସେତେବେଳେ ଗୋଟେ ଟ୍ରିଟି ଅଫ ପାଞ୍ଚଟି ଟ୍ରିଟି ହେଇଥିଲା ପ୍ୟାରିସ ପିସ୍ କନଫରେନ୍ସରେ, ଟ୍ରିଟି ଅଫ ଭର୍ସାଲିସ, ଟ୍ରିଟି ଅଫ Serb, different and other three treaties. During the Treaty of Serbs, Turkey and the allies were very severe and were resented by the Muslims of India. Turkey was given a humiliating treatment because the Turkish Sultan lost his caliphate. The Muslim as well as Gandhiji and other Congress leaders condemned this action of the British as one of the unparalleled treachery and hypocrisy. A Britishers ମାନଙ୍କୁ hypocrites ବୋଲି କହିଲେ. And the Muslims started the Khalifat movement, a Khilafat movement, and the Mahatma Gandhi identified himself with them in that movement. The result was that Mahatma Gandhi was sure of Muslim support if the Congress started the non-cooperation movement. Then it was started in September 1920. A special session of the Indian National Congress was convened, and with the leadership of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, the session fell into the hands of Gandhiji. He placed before the Congress the non-cooperation program, and it was supported by other nationalists of Congress. ଆମେ କହିଲେ ନା ଏଇଗୁଡିକ ପରେ ପ୍ରଥମେ ହେଲା କଣ? ରାୟଲଟ ଆକ୍ଟ, ତାପରେ ଜାଲିଆନାବାଗ ଟ୍ରାଜେଡି, ଦେନ୍ ଖିଲାଫତ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ, and thereafter a special session of the Indian National Congress was convened. At that time, after the death of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, The leadership of this session fell into the hands of Gandhiji. ସେଠି ଗାନ୍ଧୀ ପ୍ରଥମେ ସେ ଯୋଉ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲ କଂଗ୍ରେସର ଲିଡର ହେଲେ କେତେବେଳେ 1920 ଖ୍ରୀଷ୍ଟାବ୍ଦରେ ସେତେବେଳେ ସେ କଂଗ୍ରେସ ପାଖରେ ନନ୍ କୋଅପରେସନ ପ୍ରୋଗ୍ରାମଟିକୁ ତାଙ୍କର ରଖିଲେ ଯୋଉଟା କି ସପୋର୍ଟ ଅନ୍ୟ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲ ଲିଡର୍ସ ମାନେ ମଧ୍ୟ ସପୋର୍ଟ କଲେ ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀଙ୍କର ଏଇ ନନ୍ cooperation program. And thereafter, in the historic Nagpur session of the Indian National Congress held in December 1920, a resolution was adopted making non-cooperation as the official policy of the Congress. ତେଣୁ ଏଇଠି non cooperation movement କେବେ start 1920 in the it was discussed in the historic Nagpur session of the Indian National Congress, and who took the leadership? Mahatma Gandhi. And thereafter, first, what do you mean by non-cooperation? Non-cooperation meant the withdrawal of cooperation from the British government in all respects. ଯେତିକି କୋଅପରେସନ କରିଥିଲେ ବ୍ରିଟିଶର୍ସ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ସେଠୁ ୱିଡ୍ର ହେଇଯିବା ଗାନ୍ଧିଜୀ decided not to cooperate with the disdainful British in every sphere. By this he wanted to bring about a difference between the Britishers. He aimed at crippling not only the administration but also the economic policies of government by boycotting of foreign goods. So there are different phases of non-cooperation and different programs, and the non-cooperation movement, non-cooperation program embodied in two phases action. In first phase, the principles were adopted and different. In second phase, different peoples came forward and participated in this movement. And in the second phase, the program suggested certain constructive measures to be taken up. First, in first phase, the following principles were adopted. Number one, the ensuing election under the Government of India Act 1919 was to be boycotted. Boycott karahaba, Government of India Act 1999. Lawyers were not to attend the law courts. Court ku Indian lawyers mane jiben. Councillors were to boycott the legislatures. Students were to withdraw themselves from schools and colleges. Honorary offices and titles were to be suspended. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 5, Darbar and ceremonies held by the government officials were to be boycotted. The soldiers, clerks, and laborers were to decline to join the government services. To pursue non-cooperation movement through non-violent means, not to cooperate with the government in any field. And finally, the foreign goods were to be boycotted. Am I audible to you all? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Then in the second phase, it was the first phase. The principles were adopted. And in the second phase, constructive ideas or constructive measures. ମନେକର ପ୍ରଥମେ ଫେଜରେ ତମ ପ୍ରୋଗ୍ରାମ ଗୁଡାକର ଆଇଡିଆଜ ଗୁଡା ପ୍ରିନ୍ସିପଲ୍ସ ଗୁଡା ଆଡପ୍ଟ ହେଲା ସେକେଣ୍ଡ ଫେଜରେ ତାକୁ କେମିତି କରାହବ ସେଗୁଡିକ ହେଲା ଫାଷ୍ଟଲି ଟୁ ସେଟ୍ ଅପ୍ ଗ୍ରାମ ପଞ୍ଚାୟତ ଇନ୍ ଭିଲେଜେସ୍ ଟୁ ଟ୍ରାଏ ସୁଟ୍ସ ତାମାନେ ପ୍ରଥମେ ଯୋଉ ହେଇଥିଲା ଗ୍ରାମ ପଞ୍ଚାୟତ ଭିଲେଜ ମାନେ ରହିବେ ଗ୍ରାମର ଯାହା ଡିସ୍କସନ ହବ ଗ୍ରାମର ଯାହା ପ୍ରୋବ୍ଲେମ ହବ ତାକୁ ତଦାରଖ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ସେକେଣ୍ଡ ଟୁ ସେଟ୍ ଅପ୍ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲ ସ୍କୁଲସ ଆଣ୍ଡ କଲେଜେସ୍ ଫର ଦ ଗ୍ରୋଥ ଅଫ ଏଜୁକେସନ ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ଯୋଉ ସ୍କୁଲ ମାନ ନିର୍ମାଣ କରିଛନ୍ତି ସେଠିକି ଯିବେ ନାହିଁ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲ ସ୍କୁଲ ଦେଶୀୟ ସ୍କୁଲ ଆଉ କଲେଜେସ୍ ହବ development of cottage industries. Emphasis was to be given on the use of khadi garments, build up communal harmony, to set up a fund known as Tilak Swaraj Fund and deposit at least 1 crore of rupees to be utilized this non-cooperation movement. ତେଣୁ ଏଇଗୁଡ଼ିକ ଥିଲା ତାର programs and constructive measures, and at that time many peoples came forward like Acharya Narendra Deva, Dr. Zakir Hussain, Lala Lajpat Rai, Deshbandhu Chittranjan Das, Motilal Nehru, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and many others gave up their legal practice and come forward with the clarion call of Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, and many other distinguished citizens of India renounced their titles and awards. ତେଣୁ ପ୍ରଥମେ ଦେଖ ପିଲାମାନେ ଏଇ ଯୋଉ ତାଙ୍କର ଯୋଉ ପ୍ରୋଗ୍ରାମସ ଗୁଡିକ ହେଲା, ସେ ପ୍ରୋଗ୍ରାମସ ଗୁଡିକର କାହାକୁ ଗାନ୍ଧୀ କି ସପୋର୍ଟ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ପ୍ରଥମେ ଜାମିଆ ମାଲିଆ ଇସଲାମିଆ was established as a national Muslim university at Delhi. ତାପରେ ବିଭିନ୍ନ ପ୍ରକାର ଅନୁଷ୍ଠାନ ମନିକ ଗୁଡିକ ଖୋଲା ହେଲା, ଦେଶୀୟ ଅନୁଷ୍ଠାନ। ଇଭିନ ଯୋଉ ଲୟାର ମାନେ ପ୍ରାକ୍ଟିସ କରୁଥିଲେ, ପର୍ଟିକୁଲାରଲି ଆଚାର୍ଯ୍ୟ ନରେନ୍ଦ୍ର ଦେବ, ଡକ୍ଟର ଜାକିର ହୁସେନ, ଲାଲା ଲାଜପତ ରାୟ, and other distinguished lawyers, including Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das, Motilal Nehru, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and many others gave up their legal practices. Practice bond kardele and Mahatma Gandhi ko saito join hele. Rabindranath Tagore and many other dignitary citizens renounced their titles and awards. People gave liberal contribution to finance the non-cooperation movement, and with short span of period, more than 1 crore of rupees were collected. এই ନନ୍ କୋଅପରେସନ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟରେ ଯୋଉ ପଇସା ଯୋଉ ଦରକାର ଥିଲା, କୋଉ ଫଣ୍ଡ ହେଇଥିଲା? ତିଲକ ସ୍ୱରାଜ ଫଣ୍ଡ ହେଇଥିଲା। ବିଭିନ୍ନ ଲୋକମାନେ ବିଭିନ୍ନ ସବୁଆଡୁ ଆସି ପଇସା ଏକତ୍ରିତ ଠୁଳ ହେଇଥିଲା ଏବଂ ଆଦାୟ ହେଇଥିଲା 1 crore of rupees. Even if women offered their jewelry to augment the national fund, selling foreign goods, liquor was picketed. The British government took recourse to repression. Mass arrest of Congress and Khilafat voluntary were made. Jails were packed to capacity. ଏଠି କଣ ହେଲା? ଯୋଉ ଏଜିଟେସନ ଗୁଡିକ ହେଲା, ସେଠି ବ୍ରିଟିଶର୍ସ ମାନେ ରିପ୍ରେସନ କଲେ, ମାସ ଆରେଷ୍ଟ କଲେ କଂଗ୍ରେସ ଲିଡର ମାନଙ୍କୁ, ତାଙ୍କୁ ନେଇକି ଜେଲରେ ପୁରେଇଲେ ଏବଂ ଜେଲ ଯୋଉ ଛୋଟ ଛୋଟ ଜେଲ ତିଆରି କରିଥିଲେ, ସେ ଜେଲ ଗୁଡିକ ପ୍ୟାକ୍ଡ ହେଇଯାଇଥିଲା। ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଏ ନନ୍ କୋଅପରେସନ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ ହାଇ କୁ ପଳେଇଥିଲା, କିନ୍ତୁ ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀ ଆକୁ ବ୍ୟାନ୍ କରିଥିଲେ। ନନ୍ କୋଅପରେସନ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ ବ୍ୟାନ୍ ହେଇଥିଲା ବିକଜ ଡ୍ୟୁ ଟୁ ଏ ଚୌରି ଚୌରା ଇନସିଡେଣ୍ଟ, ବିକଜ ଦ ନନ୍ କୋଅପରେସନ movement which was gained in its height in 1921 AD, but later on the movement was withdrawn by Mahatma Gandhi because on 5th February 1922 AD, ଫେବୃଆରୀ 5, 1922ରେ କିଛି ରାଗି ଲୋକମାନେ ପୋଲିସ ଷ୍ଟେସନ ଚୌରି ଚୌରା, କୋଉଠି ସେଟା ନା ଗୋରଖପୁର ଦେଉରିଆ ଡିଷ୍ଟ୍ରିକ୍ଟ ଆଉ ଗୋରଖପୁର ଉତ୍ତରପ୍ରଦେଶର 22 ଜଣ ପୋଲିସକୁ ମାରିଦେଲେ। ତେଣୁ ଏଇ ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀଙ୍କର ୱିପନ କଣ ଥିଲା? ନନ୍ ଭାଇଲେନ୍ସ। ଏଠି ଲୋକମାନେ ଭାଇଲେନ୍ସ ଯୋଉ ହେଲେ, ଚୌରି ଚୌରା ଏକ ଭିଲେଜ ଦେଉରିଆ ଡିଷ୍ଟ୍ରିକ୍ଟର ଗୋରଖପୁର ଉତ୍ତରପ୍ରଦେଶରେ ଅବସ୍ଥିତ 22 ଜଣ ପୋଲିସକୁ ମାରିଲେ। ଗାନ୍ଧୀ ଟୁକ୍ ଏ ସିରିୟସ ଭ୍ୟୁ। ହଁ ହଁ, ନିଆଁ ଲଗେଇ ମାନେ ହେଲା ନିଆଁ ଲଗେଇ ଦେଇଥିଲେ, ଯୋଉଟା କି ସେ ନିଆଁ ଲଗେଇ ତ ପୋଲିସ ମାନେ ୱାର କିଲ୍ଡ ବା ମାନେ ମରିଗଲେ ପଛରେ। ଗାନ୍ଧୀଜୀ took a serious view of this incident. He felt that people had not yet properly understood the philosophy of non-violence. ତେଣୁ ସେ ଯୋଉ ପେନଫୁଲ ଡିସିସନ ନେଇଥିଲେ, he took this painful decision because On 5th February 1922 AD, an angry mob had attacked and burnt a police station जो जारी ଦେଇଥିଲେ ପୋଡ଼ି ଦେଇଥିଲେ at Chauri Chaura, a village in Deoria district near Gorakhpur, Uttar Pradesh, in which 22 policemen were killed. जो police station को जारी ଦେଲେ ସେଠି police station ରେ ଥିବା 22 ଜଣ police ମୃତ୍ୟୁବରଣ କରିଥିଲେ ଏବଂ ଗାନ୍ଧିଜୀ took a serious view of this incident. He felt that people had not yet properly understood the philosophy of non-violence. Many Congress leaders expressed their resentment against the withdrawal of movement, but Gandhiji arrested by the Britishers and at last 1992, the non-cooperation movement came to an end. The Khilafat movement also came to an end because a Turkish military officer, Kemal Atatürk, deposed the Sultan and thus ended the Caliphate. The government arrested Mahatma Gandhi on 10th March 1922 AD and sentenced him 6 years imprisonment. महात्मा गांधी की ब्रिटिशर्स माने अरेस्ट कले मार्च 10 1922 ख्रीष्टाब्दରେ and 6 ବର୍ଷ ପାଇଁ ସେ ଜେଲରେ ରହିଲେ but 4 years before the termination of sentences he was released on 5th February 1924 on medical grounds ଦେହ ଖରାପ ହେଇଥିବାରୁ ତାଙ୍କୁ ଜେଲରୁ କଢା ଯାଇଥିଲା ତେଣୁ ଏଇଟା ଗାନ୍ଧୀଜୀଙ୍କର ପ୍ରଥମ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ next class we'll discuss about civil disobedience movement um, and quit India movement. Okay.